So welcome, 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 our brilliant and beloved colleague, Peter. We so appreciate your consistent leadership and solidarity. And as always at Setsi, we begin all things by giving thanks to the original stewards of the various lands we're on. We give thanks to all our ancestors, all those who toiled without compassion or compensation. We give thanks to all our elders and community stalwarts whose shoulders we stand on as we build, share, and learn together for our collective liberation and sovereignty. So, Peter, can you please introduce yourself to our listeners and viewers and share a bit about your remarkable work?
Well, okay, I will name myself. I am Peter Pula, and I have forever I think I've been pursuing a path of in search of living wholeness, despite not perhaps knowing it. So my work career began with founding a newspaper called the Grassroots Review, which was a community-based newspaper in Peterborough, Ontario, that became a collaborative media effort. In that we had a variety of organizations collaborating to steward the news and to shape the news and decide what was important for us to have conversations about in community. And the assumption was that communities have everything they need to fulfill their aspirations. My thought was we just need to ask the right questions and share the stories that result from those questions. And those right questions turned out to be, as I understand them now, to be generative questions, or questions that are provocative of a person's true nature and true aims, and an invitation into their own agency, and invitation for people to join them in creating the communities that they like to create. And that's led to, I guess it's about a 35-year career now, exploring, I would say maybe social phenomenology. I'm deeply interested in life-giving structures for both the individuation process for each person in community. I think we individuate in community. It's by way of associative action, and tapping our deepest gifts and strengths in relationship that we tend to cook up very naturally in an emergent and organic way, the world that we'd like to see. So I've been interested in that for many years, and I think we're getting down to understanding 5 identifiable practices, Victor, that we may or may not talk about, that together hold enough rigor and robustness to serve as a counterpoint to some of the dominant patterns of organization and behavior that are clearly getting very tired, have reached the limits of their usefulness, and we're hearing more and more dissatisfaction and more unrest and more interest in a call for something new and life-giving and different that is strong enough to perhaps offer us a paradigm shift, or maybe a trip through a wormhole to another way of being. So those are the sorts of things I'm thinking about, Victor. And I'm very glad to be here with you. I always enjoy being in your energy. And of course, I want to shout out to our mutual friend, David LePage, as well, who's brought us together, and who's, I call him the incomparable David LePage, because the discipline and diligence that man has worked on in things that seem somewhat mundane, but he's brought to life some social architecture and has mapped out a marketplace, a social value marketplace. And these are the kinds of things I think we're both interested in, and speak to the social architecture that is liberating and life-giving. So thank you very much, Victor, for inviting me into your world and network, and holding space for this kind of conversation. Really glad to be here.
Indeed, my friend. Indeed. David is one of the most remarkable colleagues I've ever met, in terms of his deep introspection, his diligence, his tenacity, and his commitments to community practice. Like, it's just phenomenal what he's been able to accomplish. And yeah, I'm just so honored that you're able to share this time with me today, and then just some of the words that you shared, and deep insights around, and actual insights in terms of the invitation into our own agency, life-giving structures, social architecture. A lot of times, the framing things in that way, a lot of times helps ground people in terms of the work.
Absolutely.
and creates a dynamic where, once again, we can actually shift paradigms, because language
Yes.
is a tool, language is a weapon, but language can also be affirming and extractive. So I think that a lot of times when we have these conversations, or whenever we've connected, you use terms and language that is so affirming, so positive,
Mm-hmm.
and really puts people on a path to almost self-actualize some of the things that are, once again, those deep gifts and talents that sometimes lay dormant because we're so engaged in a world of distractions, you know what I mean? And that we don't have the ability to take a step back and say, hold on, invitation to my own agency. What exactly do you mean by that? So life
Mm-hmm.
structures, what do you mean? So once again, I just appreciate the fact that you're always come with all these actionable insights, and just share authenticity to all things, all conversations. So my next question is, in terms of this conversation, what's inspiring you right now? What has you curious, or what's keeping you up at night?
Quite a few things to take inspiration from. You mentioned sort of, I think you used the word paradigm, and I think what I'm getting more and more excited about is like the last several years, I think, have been extremely hard on a lot of us for a lot of reasons. And I think to some degree, the last few years woke a lot of us up to what's really important to us. Um, and so that there's this hunger for this receptivity to language and exploration around these more generative and life-giving ways of being. And what's interesting to me about that is that when people find themselves in an encounter with, say, a life-giving relational practice that invites each person into their own voice in all its strength and beauty, and are able to simply receive each other, there's a sense of like, this feels natural. I feel like I'm coming home. I feel less lonely. I feel less isolated. And what's interesting about that is I think that's the case because we actually know how. It's actually natural. So we sort of feel this sense of wholeness and connection in these more life-giving patterns. So there's both this sort of understanding growing that what we're doing as a species isn't working. I think you talked about distraction too. Like I heard it recently said that our distraction is leading to our destruction. And so we have this possibility of a paradigm shift, which is linguistic and is symbolic. But when we use the words like you and I are using, uh, it's received well because there's a remembering we experience in it. So we're being remembered to one another and to ourselves, and that feels whole and life-giving and true and authentic and honest. So I think that there is the pot, and it's the year of the dragon, the Chinese year of the dragon, which is a year of generosity and change and supportive of community and all of these. It's a generous epoch, I suppose you could say. We just had an eclipse, so maybe that's the dawning of a new era as well. So I just kind of feel like there's things are coming together that offer a bit of a possibility of a paradigm shift where the language and the symbols strengthen us and enable and ennoble our true natures to come forward. And it's the kind of work you're doing. I know you're involved with employee ownership organizations, and these are all social structures, social architectures that offer space for agency and ownership and efficacy. And if we could cobble all these together and cause them all to be seen on the whole, I think we could invite the whole of our society into a completely different relationship and experience with life. So I don't know. That's maybe a bit general, but and then there's specific things like all the podcasts out there. Like now we can do so much media, and part of me thinks, oh, it's getting so crowded. I'm going, no, that's great because everyone's able to create shared meaning, create symbols together, to create relationship together, to create around shared interests, as many and infinite and as infinite a number of those small. And I think the most successful organisms are the smallest ones. So every community having its own voice in these ways is also very inspiring. It sort of breaks from the extant powers and gives us a chance to actually fully express on the ground where we live and with the people we care about. So all those kinds of things jump in together to suggest good cause to be inspired.
Indeed.
Thank you for the question, Victor, because I didn't have all that when I came in.
No problem. One of my favorite movies is a remarkable movie. Have you ever seen Arrival? It's a sci-fi.
Oh, I might have. Yes. Refresh my memory.
It's a brilliant movie about, some deities or extraterrestrial beings that come to the planet, and they
Okay.
share language with humanity. And the language is in the form of these like glyphs. They're like
Yes.
all
Yes.
circular glyphs. And but the whole time humanity is so fearful, but almost projecting, because of like the nature of war and just sociopathic behavior, conquest, and they're so fearful that literally these beings came down, they haven't harmed
Yes.
anyone, and they're providing a gift, which is language. And the
Right.
language actually helps fold time and space. It helps. It shows time as a very colonial or just like a human construct. That's the whole universe
Right.
doesn't
Right.
abide by. And when I think about some of the terminology that's used in the ecosystems that we're trying to support, like we use ecosystem, for instance, but then a
Mm-hmm.
lot of the
Mm-hmm.
actors or stakeholders or partners don't behave like they're in an ecosystem, because the ecosystem has rivers and creeks and valleys and grass and flora and fauna, and there's soil science and microorganisms that need to like everything is working in its own lane. So we use these terms like ecosystem, but then like folks act in a very competitive, imperialistic, colonial like
Right.
way.
Right.
It's something called an ecosystem. So I always find it auspicious and important that we use language to almost affirm our values. So that's something that I always
Yes.
appreciate, anytime that we connect. The precision of your language and the way you're able to
Mm.
articulate yourself in a way that's not just resonates, but once again, it just affirms, consistently affirms.
Right.
But
Beautiful.
I'll stop because I want to make sure that even though we're flowing, I want to make sure that I ask you, so what are some of the key priorities right now in your work that you'd like to share with our listeners and our viewers?
I've thought about this, and the tendency to want to pitch and be super clear is still strong, but then I go, oh well, I'm going to screw that up. So what my real priorities are has been about clarity around some of these social practices and social arts, and so the collection of them includes social architecture. And social architecture could be things like ESOPs, could be things like cooperatives, could be associational life. But they're also like how we organize and structure organizations that in a way that they actually encourage the giftedness of each person, their wishes and their will into place in an organic and emergent way. Because I think we leave a lot of life on the table when we try to structure and organize things in a mechanical way. You talk about the ecosystems, and to align our social architectures, our way of working together with more natural patterns rather than mechanistic and mechanized patterns, I think is that's a big part of the practice. So how we design our organizations and our interactions, or design organizations to cultivate and catalyze and support the kinds of interactions that are life-giving and that we want to support. That's one of the practices. And I've recently come across the term social arts, which is hilarious. And the number of times that I've gone through all these journeys and adventures and explorations by myself, and then realized, well, somebody actually has words for this and have developed practice. Social arts. So social arts is social architecture is one of those arts or one of those practices. Another one would be, say, participatory leadership, and the hosting arts, the art of hosting is and that's a form of leadership that is leading by convening and leading by hosting. So more questions than answers, more discovery than direction, where the leader holds space for and encourages each person to step in and out and back into their own unfolding in association with others around the shared purpose for which you've gathered. So it's very different than sort of commander's intent and getting buy-in. It really is much more about hearing from each person's inner teacher and inner nature, and then holding space for what will come of that to come up and to arise and to develop. Another one would be generative journalism, and that's a narrative art. So how do we carry on narrative activity, the kinds of work you and I are talking about? Like we create these symbols together, language is important, seeing the ecology is important, And I see generative journalism as a generative journalist as a seer, someone who can bring new life simply by bearing witness, not to cajole or convince or propagandize, but simply to listen and reflect as authentically as possible the stories that emerge from our carefully crafted generative life-giving questions. So that's a third practice. A fourth one would be how we relate to one another. So these would be sort of interpersonal or relational practices. And I love the work that Thomas Hubel has done around relational presencing, and the capacity to be in a practice of relational presencing is something that enables us to hear from our inner teacher, but also to hear from that of others. And very often, if you give it time, collaborative wisdom and work emerges and arises. And that skill is one that is endemic to the capacity to serve as a participatory leader. And the last one is something about selfhood, or living wholeness, or self as a living center. And we don't have to try to be special. We are unique, every single one of us. I guess that's that old adage of know thyself. The stronger each one of us is, the stronger the whole is. And sort of the pressure in our dominant culture is towards consensus, towards agreement. But I think we have to learn how to stand in all of the diversity that shows up in a room. Every person's a walking universe. There's a lot of life and a lot of power in that. So the stronger we are centers, the more we're able to receive and see others in all of their strength and beauty. And that actually creates life. I mean, for there to be resilience, there must be complexity. And for there to be complexity, there must be diversity. So those 5 practices are becoming clearer to me. And I'm working with small groups in each one of those sort of circles who are bringing some of these into their own communities around the world. And we're sort of honing our understanding, honing our language, honing our practice. Because to build the communities that we dream of is not something that can be from top down or programmatic. The practices have to be applied according to local circumstances, who's in the room, the materials at hand, and what's live in the moment. So sort of coming to grips with these practices on the whole and how they interrelate, to me is the gateway to that paradigm shift, that gestalt that I think is possible. There you go. You asked and I went on.
Oh no, you once again, you never fail in terms of sharing such wisdom and jewels with colleagues and with listeners and viewers and anyone that's in your presence. I think that it's so important to find individuals are able to have critical analysis, but share actionable insights in a way that isn't off-putting, is once again life-affirming. But once again, it speaks true to life in a way that isn't contentious. So a lot of times there are these systems that are very rigid. And there is this approach sometimes that you have to take with these rigid systems that are a lot more resilient than fragile. Because they were fragile, they'd be broken already. You know what I mean? So they're rigid, but they're not fragile.
Right.
So
Interesting.
I just really appreciate the brilliance that you always bring to every conversation. And once again, framing out those 5 pillars, those 5 themes, those 5 tracks. There's so many ways to frame things out. And I think that you framed it in a way that can be digested by folks that are listening in, but more importantly, can be applied. Because these are practices, these are tools, these are resources, these are opportunities to take on a vision that aligns with many individuals that are in the social innovation, social impact space, their missions. So once again, I just applaud your leadership and your commitment and your willingness to share openly. So I really give thanks. I really give thanks. So my second question, what is your ultimate goal, and what does success look like and feel like to you and your colleagues?
I would say that if we were able to have, those 5 practices I spoke of, I think add up to a way of life that sort of touch on most of the conceptual levels at which we organize thought and action. So if we were to have the experience of that way of life, and to connect communities that are living into that kind of structure, that kind of practice, that kind of way of being, it's said as well as I've seen it written or said in good old John Dewey's The Public and Its Problems, where he offers the concept of the great community, which is a community of communities who are woven together in such a way as to be able to then direct, sense, and respond and direct what institutions we have for the greater good. So not from the top down, but from the bottom up. I think there's the possibility of building a mycelial mat that is given to perhaps an age and an experience where we are all encouraged and supported in our own unfolding and self-expression, and that would naturally create new freedoms, a new sense of aliveness, vitality, abundance. It could very well be, I would like to imagine, Victor, it's the next stage in human evolution. That's what success would feel like, I think. Or that's what it would look like. That's not what it would feel like. That's probably another question.
That's absolutely beautiful.
That's what I have in mind, Victor. How does that strike you?
That strikes me as a well thought out answer to a question that we ask all our interviews, but I think that's you didn't think it out in the same way as others. A lot of folks, they get the question, they'll take a look at it, they'll double back, and when they show up, and I feel like a lot of times when we have conversations, you're almost inspired in the moment. So once again, I appreciate the authenticity that you bring to every conversation. My last question: do you have any closing thoughts or calls to action for our listeners and our viewers?
If I guess I could suggest, if anyone's interested in pursuing these lines of thinking, we have a wonderful community on Mighty Networks called A New Commons. So if anyone's interested in joining in some of these practices and these conversations, they can head to Mighty Networks and then search for A New Commons. If in a few weeks from now you can't find a New Commons, it might be because I've changed it to Great Communities. So I'll just sort of put that note of possible change out there. And also Axiom News, which you and I have had some relationship and conversation around in the past. Victor has been quiet for the last few years, but with the proliferation of more generative journalism in the world, I now have the opportunity to revive that platform as a way to curate stories from a variety of different ecosystems to see if we can build something of a whole in the story. So perhaps axiomnews.com and A New Commons or Great Communities inside of Mighty Networks would be a fun place to continue the conversation.
Peter, thank you so much for all that you do for so many. Very excited.
You're very welcome. And thank you, Victor.
Of Axiom. No. Listen, I'm appreciative of all your work, and I really give thanks for the fact that you even shout out to our remarkable colleague, David LePage. I have to give him a call. We were supposed to do something together, and I got an email that I really want to reach out to him and just make sure that we continue to lift up remarkable leaders like himself in so many ways.
Absolutely.
Once again, I just give thanks for your leadership, your tenacity, your authenticity, transparency, and the way you show up for so many people, my friend. I appreciate you, as always. And as always, Setsi, we close the way we began this conversation, this interview, by giving thanks to the original stewards of the various lands around. We give thanks to all our ancestors, all those who toiled without compassion or compensation. We give thanks to all our elders and community stalwarts whose shoulders we stand on as we build, share, and grow towards our own collective liberation. I appreciate you so much, Peter, and I give thanks for all that you do for so.
Beautiful. Thank you very much, Victor.